So, when I was 18, I started taking care of my elderly grandfather. He was about 80 at the time, and he's dead now. But I learned a lot by being immersed in that kind of environment at that time. I wasn't doing great mentally. Um, and for some reason, I thought it was a great idea to take care of someone else who couldn't take care of themselves. So I was living in a big house um, with my grandpa downstairs, and I had a whole floor to myself. And I used to smoke a shit ton of weed, like all the time. I smoked way too much. I took edibles. Um, and I'd wake up and I'd have to drive my grandpa everywhere he needed to go. Um, I'd have to do little things you don't even think about, usually, unless you can't do them or you're taking care of someone who can't do them. Like taking pee from a bedside urinal and dumping it, or putting on socks. And there's something a little bit funny about the whole thing is that we both were undiagnosed autistic. I'm almost certain um, my grandpa is also autistic. And grandpa would do some funny things for someone his age. Sometimes he'd look in the mirror and he'd say, I look like a I look like my father, or I'm a child in an old man's body. I only see my father in the mirror now. And um, imagine this: depressed, basically child, me at the time, watching him wither away, dying. And I really had no idea what he was saying in that moment. I heard it and went through one ear, out the other ear, because what the hell does that even mean? But looking back on it, I think it meant that um, that who he identified with was the past version of himself. He still saw himself from this nostalgic point of view. My grandpa was the kind of guy who liked to reminisce, um, kept his childhood in some way like a flame that he had to keep going with firewood. And looking back at good times and remembering certain essences of youth kept him going. He actually he was a published author and had a published essay about childhood, about lessons um, that he wanted to teach his grandkids. Um, it's in a book. Um, and he said that he wanted to keep his childhood going. And I never really read this essay until I was an adult. Um, and I read it again last fall. I was speaking at an event uh, in his honor. He had an award named after him, and I was asked to join the event as a guest for um, last year. And for the Herb Tayback Awards, I was thinking about that essay, and I realized that I do the same thing. And maybe it's a bit autistic to do it, to have this nostalgia, looking back, having the same routines. My grandpa always would have a Sunday leftover omelet where he'd make leftovers in the omelet. And it would be similar stuff, routine, some of the things predictable. When he was dying, he wanted a pineapple orange juice right by the bedside. He needed his phone charger under the landline phone so it wouldn't fall to the ground. His oxygen under the blanket, slightly folded, and a coffee cake. And he loved routine. And I've realized, somewhat reluctantly, that I do too. I actually wrote a song when I was like 18, when I was teaching myself how to rap, where I said, always changing, never the same. I was thinking that about myself, that I didn't really need a routine. But after my grandpa died, I really had no routine because I didn't have him to take care of. I was doing, I wasn't in school. It was during COVID, undiagnosed autistic at the time. And it was rough. Having a routine, even when I'd stay up all night writing music, when I was taking care of my grandpa, waking him up with the loud ass speakers, that was something. I mean, I'd have to wake up to wheel him around and like get him to the bathroom, help him get his socks on, dump the piss out, like the urinal. And once he was gone, I really fell apart because then it was me staying awake all night smoking weed and having no reason to get up in the morning. And there was something sort of funny about it because at the time I had 90,000 or close to 90,000 followers on TikTok for gaming. I wanted to please everyone with my videos. And I made them in a way where I was clinging to a certain format because it had worked in the past. Yay! That fucking sucked. And I was grieving. And I don't think I could grieve for years because I did not have the emotional space from like my concerns. I was stuck in the past, and I couldn't. I just couldn't grieve, and I think. Sorry, give me a second. My my ambitions kept me from being able to sit still. I always thought I had to post a Minecraft video, like, about Minecraft. I fucking hate playing Minecraft now, honestly, because it reminds me of that time. Uh, Having 90,000 followers um, couldn't have made me feel more alone, because I had no friends at the time, really, that I talked to often. Um, some of them were toxic to be around. And I was stuck inside during COVID, and then my routine was just to be alone all the time. When you're someone like me and you need a routine, and your routine, you like doing the same things, you don't really like certain kinds of changes, and your routine is being completely alone, uh, and you sort of become uh, a bit agoraphobic. That's where I was at too. When I was taking care of my grandpa, um, I definitely was afraid to leave the house, even before COVID. Um, um, I'd feel very bad about it. And once COVID hit, and you also had the added threat of getting COVID, you sort of sinks in a little bit deeper. I wouldn't leave the house. And taking care of an old man when you can barely take care of yourself takes a bit of repression. Uh, you have to shut down your own needs and emotions to take care of the task at hand, even when your emotions are still eating you from the inside out. And this past year, and more than this past year, I've been moving past those patterns. I've been accepting routine's not a bad thing. It doesn't have to trap you if you choose a good one. You don't need to look to other people for validation in the same way that, like, a lot of people do, including myself in the past and sometimes now. I've had a good relationship, and you don't need to look to other people to, like, fill that hole. If you don't have that void where you think you need someone else to complete you filled before and you start a relationship, in some ways, it makes the relationship harder. Like, I remember I was a 20-year-old virgin, and I felt ashamed of that. I was very ashamed of that. And I thought that I had to fill that void somehow. And the only thing that happens when you try to fill that void compulsively is regret. Trust me. It wasn't as bad as I thought to be in that position, because desperation breeds more desperation. And I meditated 100 hours this past year, a little bit more probably. And just sitting there in silence at first is painful. I mean, I didn't use a guided meditation. I just sit there in darkness, and breathe. And sometimes I couldn't stop thinking for a whole hour. And that's how it started. And things from the past come into your mind, and you learn about yourself. You learn different ways to listen to yourself. You learn what goes on in the back of your head when you're busy doing other things. You learn what about silence is overstimulating as an autistic person, and you adapt. And I started using fidget rocks more. I started learning about myself in that way. Meditation was very helpful. And I moved out of that house for a few years and to a new city, and I made friends with poets, and they're awesome. And I made friends with some other people too, and found out I was autistic, and I felt lots of regret. And they're a lot better now. And I don't hate myself now for being the way I am, for making mistakes, for not being liked by everyone. And that was a hard pill to swallow, even though on paper it sounds great to love yourself. It sounds great to not be completely overstimulated all the time. But when that's your routine, it's hard to break. And I can say at this point, like, sometimes when I look in the mirror, just like my grandpa, I don't recognize the person I've become. And it's not in a bad way, it's a good way, actually. I look in the mirror and I instinctively think of the past. And I look, and who's that? It's an adult who can be accepting of themselves, who doesn't dwell all the time on what's wrong with them, who doesn't think about things the same way, who's done so many things differently now. Because I don't want to be a person living with regret more than I have to. I learned that from my grandfather as well. He lived with a lot of regrets in a lot of ways. And he had another book titled No Whining. Can you imagine taking care of someone who won't cry for help when they fall down on the floor and can't get up themselves? Because that's what happened. Here's the man who wrote the book No Whining, who refuses to complain about things where it might be okay. There were times he'd sit there maybe for an hour or two when I wasn't there, couldn't hear him through the walls of the house. And he had a good reason for this ethos. It's because he was told he would never walk again, and then he was paralyzed. And he was able to walk again because he was notoriously stubborn. And his book was amazing. And it really, that worked for that situation. But when you're dying, an old man, You can't just struggle through old age like in the same way and overcome it, because everyone dies. Everyone is very likely to get sick when they're old and not be able to do things the same way. And I was responsible for taking care of him, and I would worry that he was hurt. Um, and I learned from that it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to. Whining is not the worst thing in the world all the time. When someone thinks you're whining, sometimes it's sharing. Because I'm a therapist in training, you learn um, that some things help people feel heard and listened to, other things make them feel invalidated. And a lot of like the rhetoric around feeling like you can't share your feelings is the reason why we suffer. Um, anyways, thanks for watching. If you hated the video, leave. If you liked it, subscribe. Do what you like. And as always,